So partly what I want to talk about in terms of the immune system is that the immune system is a vital um, system for all of us. It really provides key protection, whether you're a newborn, a child, or an adult. And what we do know, and I'm sure we're all aware, that in the absence of a functional immune system, the host is severely compromised. So, Alton, I've just sent you an email of the slides. Hopefully, they should be with you shortly. So, what's really important, however, is despite that we have a robust and functional immune system, there are times when our body's defenses are overwhelmed, whereby our natural immune system um, is unable really to cope with an infection. Now, I should point out, as I'm sure we're all aware, is that there are many diseases um, that are contributed by what we call pathogens or microorganisms. Thank you. Someone's put the slides up. I don't have the control to press next. So
We'll
if
do
I
that.
could ask whoever to press next, that would be useful if that was possible. So thank you. So this slide, I just want to highlight this slide to show everyone, um, the amount of infectious diseases that one can get in one's lifetime, whether it's TB, whether it's by virus, whether it's by fungi or parasites. A key thing to think about, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, is in order to get infection, the microorganism has to invade. So what we call routes of infection. And there are primarily 3 or 4 major routes. As you can see from this diagram, one of the major routes of infection is through aerial transmission. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why people are asked to wear a mask. So if once the body is invaded, that's one mechanism. And that's another mechanism is by the ingestion of food, i.e. food poisoning. Another one is when your skin gets cut, and therefore when your skin is breached, microorganisms can potentially um, uh, cause disease. Okay, so it's when the body is breached you can potentially get infectious diseases. Next slide, please. And so what's really important is that we have a functional immune system. Can you press next and you'll see what I'm referring to? And next, and next. Thank you. So there's 2 parts of our body's defenses. There's our innate, what we call natural, okay? And it's basically like the first layer. Our skin is incredibly important in terms of protection. Then the lining of our alimentary canal, our stomach, for example, the stomach lining is the stomach actually is pH. It's at pH 1. Even the tears that you produce also contain properties of defense mechanism. Then there's also, when you are infected and you increase your body temperature, where you have a fever, that is the body's defense mechanism. The key thing about having a high body temperature, ladies and gentlemen, is that germs, bacteria, viruses don't like high temperature. So the body is increasing its temperature in order to remove the pathogen. Then there is what we call the more specific response. And this is what people have been talking about when we're talking about COVID and we're talking about vaccination, is the adaptive immune system. And you would have heard terms like antibodies or T cells or B cells. So in our body, we have, these are part of our white blood cells. And these cells make specific proteins that will destroy virus. More importantly, what this part of our immune system has got memory. So when you see the disease for the first time, you'll make a response. And when you see it again, the response is quicker and greater. And that's the concept of immunological memory. And importantly, that's what vaccination is about. It's about priming and boosting your immune system so that when you see the microorganism again, you can make a far greater and a quicker immune response. Okay, next slide. So our immune system is important throughout life, and we know this. If your immune system doesn't work, or if your immune system has problems, it can have a detrimental effect. We see this with COVID, because if you notice with COVID, a large proportion of sadly older individuals have died. And that's primarily because they've got a weaker immune system. Okay. So next slide, please. So the question therefore then, why do we need vaccines? And as I said before, one of the main reasons why, and I'll show you some of the data that has demonstrated the role of vaccination. Now, I should say from the onset that what I'm presenting are factual information about our immune system and vaccination. I am in no way endorsing whether you or should not take the vaccine. As Pastor Bella's mentioned, there seems to be a lot of, dare I say, misinformation that seems to have circulated in our community. And my role today is really just to provide you with the factual information, and therefore you can make an informed choice. I'm well aware of the inequalities with health when it comes to our community, and there's a history of that. And that, no doubt, and rightly so, has clouded our judgment about various things. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. So if you look at all these diseases, whooping coughs, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, diseases that you may have forgotten about. But as I'll show you, most of these diseases are eradicated, and it's primarily due to vaccination. That's a fact. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd tell you how and why the virus make you ill, as we're talking about COVID-19. Now, a virus is an organism that cannot replicate, i.e. divide outside a cell. What a virus will do, it will use the cell machinery to actually make more of itself. So what happens is a virus will attach to a cell, it will get inside the cell, and it will then use the host machinery, the cell machinery, to make more of itself. And once it's made more of itself, it will destroy the cell and then go to other cells within the body. And that's primarily what causes individuals to become sick and become unwell. Okay, next slide, please. So how do vaccines work? The basic principles of vaccines is the same as if you generate an immune response. So what you will make, for example, are antibodies. So the body will make antibodies that would normally fight an infection. But what a vaccine is doing is mimicking that response. And someone emailed me to ask me, are there different types of vaccines? And I put a slide in there just to show you that there's different types. But in most cases, a vaccine is not the same as the actual harmful organism. It's like a mimic. It's basically training the body to make that response. So when you do encounter that disease, and when you see it, the body is now already primed. It recognizes it, it has memory. Okay, next slide, please. So here are different vaccine types, because I know a couple of people have asked me this question, and this will come particularly when we talk about COVID vaccines. So for example, there's what we call a DNA and RNA vaccine. So this is the virus code, and what you can do is the body will make the proteins of the RNA or DNA, and I can explain more when we talk about COVID. And what that can do, the body will then make an immune response to the protein of that RNA or DNA. Then there's what's called live attenuated. So this is primarily a weakened form of the virus, all right? So what happens is the virus has grown over time in a laboratory and it's got a weakened form. A classic example of that is chickenpox. Then there's what's called an inactivated vaccine. So this may be the virus that causes disease or the organism, but what you've done is you've primarily killed it. This could be done primarily through heat. So you've boiled up the vaccine, it's completely destroyed, and then you then use that. Classic example for that is polio. Then another example are what we call subunits or different parts of the microorganism that's caused disease. All right. So just a small part of that organism, so not the whole, just a small part, and that's used. An example of that is pertussis, which is what's used for whooping cough. Then finally, there's the viral vector. So basically, it's a harmful virus, but you actually put in the actual parts of the microorganism that's causing disease. All right. An example of that is Ebola. So there are all different types of vaccines, and I should say vaccine development has been going on for well over 50 plus years. Next slide, please. So here's overall what role of vaccination has done. It's involved in sort of priming and boosting the immune system, because sometimes, for example, the tetanus vaccine that many of us get lasts for about 10 years. And sometimes our immune system, it weans off and we may get a boost, particularly, if we're going abroad and so forth. What it does, it offers protection from harmful disease and it stops the spread. Someone's asked me about herd immunity, and I'll describe that. So let's look at some of this data, because I think the data is really important when we talk about vaccination. So I want to show you some data, and it's really for folks who can remember, who were born in the 50s and 60s, who can remember some of these terrible diseases that were prevalent, not just within the UK, but throughout the world. So let's look at some slides, let's look at some data. And each slide with the data, I've actually provided a reference, a link that you can go and look. These are mostly from what we call peer-reviewed publications, okay? So let's have a look. I know there's some people waiting in the room, so you may want to let them in. So this is the data from Public Health England that's looking at measles. Measles is a terrible disease, and in fact, it can cause death, okay? And what you'll see on the larger graph is the notification of measles. So when measles has been notified by the GP or whatever, that's registered. So if you look back in the 1950s, you'll see the notification, and this is, I should say, not 600, it's based on 600 per 100,000, per 1,000. So there's measles back then was really a problem, not just in the UK, but large part of the world. And notice that as soon as the measles vaccine was introduced in the mid-60s, note how remarkably the rapid notification of measles, not only in the notification, but more importantly, in deaths. That's the real correlation that you need. So what you'll see is that the introduction of the vaccine actually gives rise to, the reduction of measles death. I'm going to come back to measles because when we talk about herd immunity, and particularly the number of people that have been vaccinated, you're going to see another correlation when number of people that get vaccinated isn't above 95%, you'll see measles rise. Again, it's that correlation which we need to look at. Next slide, please. This looks at polio, which is a terrible disease. And anyone who will remember polio, back again in the 1950s. So look again at when the different types of vaccines were introduced. And again, if you want to look at and find the data, it's again in Public Health England. So again, notification and death and the reduction of both of those correlate with vaccine uptake. Next slide, please. This is with whooping cough. So whooping cough, again, another terrible disease. And again, if anyone can remember this, you'll know that the problem it had occurs very much in sort of newborns. And again, note the correlation to when vaccines are introduced and the fact that the number of notifications and subsequent death goes down. And note again, I'm going to come back to this, that when the coverage becomes lower, and you'll see between 75 and 1980, the coverage becomes low and the number of cases rise. I'm going to come back to that because I want to discuss that with the concept of herd immunity. Next slide, please. Smallpox. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers smallpox. Smallpox was a terrible disease. And then in the 1960s, the World Health Organization decided it's important that we eradicate. I've just put a cartoon. I felt it was unfair to actually show real pictures. But here's a really important point we need to think about, is that since smallpox has been eradicated, the last known case was in 1980, anyone born on the planet from about 1982, 83 have never been immunized for smallpox. So if you look at it, the ultimate aim is that once the disease is completely eradicated and no longer in circulation, there's no need to vaccinate. So there's no one born after the mid-80s have never been vaccinated for smallpox. Why would you? It doesn't exist. So that's the ultimate aim of when a disease is eradicated, there's no need for a vaccine. Next slide, please. And this to show you in terms of how many people are taking vaccines. This is based on last year's data from WHO and the UN in terms of uptake of the various vaccines. We're talking of millions of people that have been taking vaccines. And there's evidence, and again, it's all, people have been discussing this, is one of the reasons why we see an increase in longevity in lifespan is clearly based on the fact that certain diseases like TB or like measles, which would be a killer back in the 40s and in the 50s, still have problems today, but some of these diseases have been eradicated. And the argument has been, this looks like it's due to some degree with vaccination. Not just to do with vaccination, I might add. There's hygiene, and there's also a case of having a more robust diet. So I'm not saying vaccines, but people have been looking at this to ask the question, increasing in lifespan. In the UK, there are more now octogenarians than ever before. Okay, next slide. So I want to concentrate on herd immunity. So some questions come in. Can you press the next button, please? I want to focus on this area. So you notice when vaccine coverage goes down a certain amount, notification of a disease occurs. And so I want to explain the concept of herd immunity. Next slide. And what's really important, and I think, people have been talking about COVID-19 or let's get herd immunity with COVID. I should point out herd immunity is referenced and only related to vaccination. The idea being is that on one of the slides here, on the graph here, you see if some people get vaccinated, or i.e. very small number of people get vaccinated, the virus will spread, okay? So, whereas if most people get vaccinated, thereby the number of people that have not been vaccinated, the likelihood of them meeting is remote, and therefore the spread is limited, it's contained, and the likelihood of two people in red meeting is remote. Okay, and that's what we mean by herd immunity. And we know the concept works. Next slide, please. Because what we're now seeing in certain cases is the fact that when not enough people have been vaccinated for the measles vaccine as children, subsequently, you're going to see, and you are now seeing, measles outbreaks occurring not just in the UK, but in other parts around the world. Because there's a lack of herd immunity. Not everybody needs to be vaccinated, but if enough people aren't being vaccinated, the likelihood of two people that have not been vaccinated to meet can increase. And this was a case in Wales. Next slide, please. So let's now talk in the last couple of minutes about COVID-19 as we're here today. So here are some of the current figures that are out now. So there's the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And so far, over 12,000 people have been involved in that trial. In the trial with the Pfizer BioNTech, this is the one that has now been approved by the UK for emergency use, as well as the FDA, as well as I heard recently Health Canada. Okay. Now, I should point out the clinical trial involved 22,000 people. But recently, and you may have seen on the BBC website, the UK so far have administered 130,000 vaccination of the Pfizer BioNTech. Okay. There has been reports that two individuals have developed an allergic reaction to the vaccine. And this is seen even in people who are allergic to certain vaccines. Okay, so there are indeed some side effects. Side effects, which is interesting, which actually mimics the disease. So something to think about. In the US recently, there have been 4 people that have had partial paralysis, and that's been looked at. And again, that's only temporary. But I should point out, with any drug, there will be some side effects. And that needs to be recognized. In terms of the efficacy, the Pfizer BioNTech is 95% efficient, so that's required 2 doses for long-term immunity, whereas the Oxford AstraZeneca is about 90%. And the other one, the Madeira one, which I believe has also been approved recently, even today, I believe, by the FDA, has also got a 95% efficacy. On the slide, where you see 1 and 2, I've actually got the references for those publications if anybody wants to look more closely. Next slide, please. So one question people have often asked is, a vaccine will take 15 years. And so naturally people are saying, well, hold on a minute, this is taking like a year. Why has it become so quick? And it's a right and a proper question to ask. So here's basically on the top of this slide is a traditional development of a vaccine, right? Where you'll see it will take a few years to develop. There's clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And what these means is the number of participants that are involved in each of these stages, testing of the results, and then it goes to regulatory bodies. So as you can see, this could take, 10 years. So the question is, why has this vaccine taken so long? And there's a number of reasons for that. One, I can tell you this, there has been more brain power, more scientists that have been studying COVID-19 than ever before. As an immunologist, speaking to some of my immunological colleagues, they've dropped whatever they were doing and have been studying COVID-19. When patients were being into hospital, blood was being taken, and immunologists were actually studying patients' blood. Literally, everybody dropped. And what's really important, and you may have noticed this, and I hope you have, is that in many of the cases, it was universities collaborating with industry. Very rare do you see that happening, because they're kind of seen not as good bedfellows. So what you saw was universities and industry coming together, immunologists sharing data with other colleagues around the world. I was listening to webinars from USA, from Canada, Australia. So literally everybody was sharing data. I've been an immunologist for over 35 years, and I've never seen anything like this, where there was a mass collaboration. And the debate now, should we collaborate like this in the future? Similarly, in terms of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials, they're almost done simultaneously. Again, a different approach to what was going on. And more importantly, and I think this is really key, because of this and the clear concern, that may happen with clinical trials, people were, releasing the information about the clinical trials, etc. So a large number of the publications where immunologists and scientists were studying COVID-19 have actually been released. And so they're now available in the public domain. Next slide. So the last couple of slides, I just want to mention about the vaccine, because again, some people were thinking, wow, this vaccine, it can take my DNA and stuff like that.
Right.
So
if you could just wrap it up now for us to be done.
Yeah. So this is the one about the Pfizer vaccine. It's what's called a messenger RNA. Okay. It cannot take your DNA. Okay. Next slide. And this is the one of the viral vector. Okay. So this is the one by is currently in clinical trial by Oxford and AstraZeneca, where they take the virus material, put it into a harmless vector, and then that's administered. So I just want to leave by thanking the organizers. And I just want to leave you with a couple of summary points. Again, I'm not advocating whether you take it or not. I'm just presenting you with what we know about the immune system and vaccination in general. What we now know, we've known for a long time, herd immunity protects both the individual and the community in general. Herd immunity cannot be achieved without a vaccine. You can't be herd immunity for a disease that can potentially harm you. Vaccines, on the whole, and given the number of millions of people that have been vaccinated, offer a safe control alternative to getting a disease that can kill you. And I should point out, again, this is a concern people have, COVID-19 vaccines have been developed in the same stringent regulations. I've sit on the Medicine and Health Production Regulation Agency, MHRA, for yellow fever, and I can tell you, data is scrutinized. And it also, on that board, includes the stakeholders of everyone, not just scientists, but lay individuals. So I'll stop there, and I'm more than happy to take questions either at the very end of when all the other speakers have spoken. Thank you very much.